In the hallowed, often stifling, halls of the Senate, where hushed whispers often conceal the roar of ambition, all eyes turned. The very air seemed to thicken with anticipation, each breath held in collective suspense. It was a moment poised to make even the most seasoned politician falter, a sudden, blinding flash from a gathering storm that had been brewing for weeks. Senator John Kennedy, usually a man of serene composure, found himself unexpectedly facing a blistering onslaught. From Elizabeth Warren, a verbal assault designed to humiliate, to diminish, to utterly silence. But with a single, concise sentence of verbal equivalent of a perfectly aimed lightning bolt, Kennedy didn't just parry the attack. He left the entire room stunned. Warren, renowned for her sharp wit and unyielding resolve, was utterly speechless. The chamber, moments before, gripped by a tense quiet, erupted in a cacophony of gasps, murmurs, and frantic typing. Before we dive into the heart of this incredible story, one that exposes the raw power of truth in a world shrouded in political maneuverings, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if you want to stay on top of the latest stories that expose uncomfortable truths and electrify the nation, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to light. Now, let's get back to the Senate. The grand meeting room was a tableau of polished mahogany tables, gleaming under the dim, almost reverent glow of chandeliers. Here, senators sat, their eyes darting across notes, tablets, and the faces of their colleagues like wary travelers sensing a storm about to break. That day's session was focused on disaster relief fund allocation, a topic laden with the very real pain of millions still reeling from the unimaginable aftermath of Hurricane Hecate. This monstrous storm had utterly devastated Louisiana, leaving shattered communities, irreparable losses, and a lingering scent of despair in its wake. At his desk sat John Kennedy, the senator for whom Louisiana was more than just a state on a map. It was home, etched into the very core of his being. His demeanor was outwardly calm, but his sharp, piercing blue eyes scanned the room with the vigilant intensity of someone who had faced countless challenges, both the unpredictable fury of nature and the calculated machinations of politics. His hand rested lightly on a stack of documents, the edges of a Reuters report peeking out, hinting at a truth that would soon shatter the carefully constructed fad of Washington. This report detailed an astonishing $500 million in relief funds urgently needed for the ravaged communities of Louisiana, shockingly diverted to Massachusetts. His fingers tapped a rhythmic, almost imperceptible pattern, a subtle concealment of the quiet fire smoldering within him. Though accustomed to the fiery, often theatrical, debates that characterized Senate life, even Kennedy could not have fully anticipated the political explosion that was about to unfold, an eruption that would expose a profound betrayal of trust. As the room's hushed atmosphere settled, the sharp sound of a chair scraping against the ornate wooden floor broke the silence, a harsh punctuation mark. All heads turned. Elizabeth Warren, the formidable senator from Massachusetts, rose. Her presence was commanding, almost predatory, her eyes blazing as if to sear the entire space with her indignation. Clutched in her hand was a file, her knuckles white, gripping it with an intensity that spoke of righteous fury. Her voice, when it came, cut like a blade, sharp and unyielding. Senator Kennedy, she began, her tone dripping with accusation, each word a venomous drop. The American people deserve the truth. Why have you remained silent while Louisiana drowns in suffering after Hurricane Hecate? When families lost homes, livelihoods, loved ones? Or are you bound by political TIs, abandoning those you swore to serve? The room seemed to freeze. Senators paused, their pens hovering motionless over notebooks, hands suspended mid-air as Warren's words landed like a physical punch. In the gallery above, reporters leaned closer, their fingers flying furiously across keyboards, already drafting initial headlines, sensing the seismic shift occurring before their very eyes. Warren's attack was not just criticism. It was a deliberate, calculated strike, precisely engineered to humiliate Kennedy before his colleagues, before the voracious press, and before a nation watching on C-SPAN. But Warren didn't stop there. With a dramatic flourish that echoed like thunder, she slammed her file onto the polished table. "You've said nothing, Senator Kennedy," she boomed, her voice gaining momentum, while people begged for help, silent, as children drank contaminated water due to collapsed systems. Inactive as entire towns were swept away by floods, damages that could have been prevented if funds were used correctly. Has party loyalty made you forget those who elected you? A few of her allies scattered across the chamber offered sharp, almost desperate claps, but most of the room fell into an eerie, almost sacred silence. All eyes now were fixed on Kennedy, awaiting his response. Would he waver? Would he deflect? The camera zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression on Kennedy's face. But he didn't flinch. His expression was calm, almost serene, as if he was sitting on a Louisiana porch, watching a gentle rain, rather than being in the searing crosshairs of a meticulously planned political ambush. Beneath that exterior, however, a quiet surge began to rise, an unshakable resolve taking root. Images flashed in his mind, wading through knee-deep water in Shreveport, his shoes soaked, his heart heavy as he heard story after story of loss. He recalled Sarah's face, a mother in Monroe, her trembling hands clutching his as she spoke of her son, swept away by the floodwaters. Kennedy had been there, not for the cameras, not for political gain, but in those quiet, desperate moments when despair enveloped the air. He had held people's hands, he had promised action, and he had carried the crushing weight of their stories back to Washington. Now, Warren dared to accuse him of turning his back on those he swore to protect. The sheer audacity of her attack ignited a silent, burning fire within him. But Kennedy remained silent, waiting for the perfect, irrefutable moment to respond. Warren, misinterpreting his composure as weakness, pressed her attack, her voice rising sharply like a symphony reaching its crescendo. "Answer us, Senator Kennedy," she demanded, pointing directly at him, her eyes narrowing with defiance. "Why do you sit silently while people suffer? Why haven't you demanded accountability for the mismanagement of relief funds? Or is staying quiet to protect political allies simply easier?" The room truly felt like a pressure cooker, the tension so thick the very air seemed to hum with it. Reporters scribbled frantically, their pens scratching like insistent insects. Some senators shifted in their seats, sensing that Warren was playing a risky game, betting on Kennedy's established image as a folksy figure who often used humor to dodge rather than confront directly. She expected him to jest, to sidestep her accusations. But she was profoundly mistaken. Kennedy knew this wasn't just personal. This was about the people, the families still living in temporary shelters, the children drinking bottled water because their taps ran with mud. This was about the truth, and he wouldn't let Warren's theatrics obscure it. Slowly, deliberately, John Kennedy stood. His movements were resolute, almost unhurried, yet they commanded the absolute attention of every soul in the Senate chamber. The air, which moments before had hummed with Elizabeth Warren's cutting accusations, now crackled with an almost unbearable anticipation, a palpable energy that seemed to static charge the very atmosphere. He adjusted his tie, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but one that served to steady himself, anchoring him in the swirling vortex of expectation. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, locked onto Warren, steady as a storm hunter facing his quarry. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, remarkably clear, carrying the profound weight of someone who had seen far too much real suffering to be swayed by mere grandstanding. "Senator Warren," he said, each word measured, resonating with a quiet power that transcended the political theater of the room. "When people were crying for help in the floodwaters, when families were lost and homes swept away, when hope was all but drowned, where were you? Were you writing op-eds at your desk in Washington? Were you comfortably attending conferences in Boston, hundreds of miles away, while we buried our loved ones?" Silence, not just a quiet, but a complete, all-encompassing silence, as if the very air had been violently sucked out of the room. A pen, forgotten in a reporter's trembling hand, clattered loudly to the polished wooden floor, its sound echoing unnaturally in the sudden stillness. In the gallery, a reporter gasped, her hand instinctively flying to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Warren froze. Her face, moments before ablaze with accusatory fire, paled dramatically, losing all its color. Her lips parted as if to form a retort, to unleash another volley of cutting words, but no sound emerged. Her hands, which had so confidently slammed the file onto the table, now trembled violently, gripping the table's edge for desperate balance, white-knuckled and strained. The chamber seemed petrified, every eye fixed on her, waiting for a retort. That never arrived, a counter-punch that simply evaporated. Kennedy's words weren't just a rebuttal. They were a precise surgical strike. They were a devastating exposure of a truth everyone in that room, from the most junior staffer to the most seasoned senator, knew but had dared not voice, while Kennedy had been waist-deep in the ravaged streets of Shreveport, listening to the harrowing stories of survivors, offering what little comfort he could, and promising action. Warren had been hundreds of miles away, penning opinion pieces in Massachusetts or attending high-profile conferences in Boston. Disconnected from the very human crisis she now so vehemently claimed to champion, the cameras, unflinching, captured every agonizing moment, Warren's stunned, mortified face, Kennedy's unyielding, almost serene gaze, and the myriad of astonished glances exchanged between senators, their expressions a mix of disbelief and dawning realization. Outside the Senate, the clip of Kennedy's single, devastating line went viral with astonishing speed. Hashtags exploded across social media. "What did a justy?" screamed one post, paired with a loop of Warren's frozen expression. "Kennedy spoke. For every forgotten American." Another commented, their voice thick with raw emotion, encapsulating the public's immediate, visceral reaction. In the chamber, the fallout was immediate and palpable. A few of Warren's most loyal allies, their faces etched with concern, tried to rally, whispering urgently to her, urging a response, any response. But she stood motionless, as if trapped, a deer caught in blinding headlights. She flipped through her file, her movements clumsy, as if searching for an escape, a hidden page, a forgotten defense. But her trembling hands betrayed her shattered composure. Kennedy, by stark contrast, didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply sat down, his hands clasped calmly on the table, his eyes still fixed on Warren, not with malice, but with the quiet, firm resolve of someone who had just voiced a long-ignored, deeply painful truth. Behind him, almost unnoticed, a young staffer discreetly wiped a tear from her cheek, profoundly moved by the weight of the moment. She had family in Monroe who had lost everything to Hecate. Kennedy's simple, honest words felt like a validation of their pain, a voice for the abandoned, a silent roar on behalf of those who had been silenced. The Senate's echo hadn't faded. Before the nation exploded, John Kennedy's words, Senator Warren, when people were crying for help in the floodwaters, "Where were you writing op-eds at your desk while we buried our loved ones?" ignited a media firestorm that spread far beyond Washington's marble walls. News channels replayed the clip relentlessly, anchors dissecting every word, every pause, every flicker on Elizabeth Warren's face. Social media became an unyielding, furious tribunal, a digital echo chamber of outrage and disbelief. But the real storm, the true reckoning, was just beginning. As the truth behind Kennedy's piercing question began to emerge, a sickening web of neglect and misconduct woven deep in the corridors of power started to unravel. Driven by the viral momentum, intrepid reporters and relentless social media users began digging, tirelessly seeking concrete evidence of Warren's absence during the crisis. The public records they unearthed were damning, a stark, undeniable indictment. At the absolute height of the Hurricane Hecate crisis, when Louisiana was literally drowning in suffering, Warren had attended not one, but 3 high-profile fundraisers, one in the opulent ballrooms of Washington, D.C., one amidst the exclusive circles of Boston, and another in the historic elegance of Philadelphia. Images spread like wildfire online, Warren in an elegant dress, beaming, clinking glasses with well-heeled donors at a Boston conference, while concurrently, her supposed constituents waded through contaminated floodwaters, their lives shattered. Crucially, no public statement from her office had even mentioned the disaster during that critical period. The contrast was stark, obscene, and it fueled a blistering wave of public outrage, a profound sense of betrayal not just in Louisiana, but nationwide, where people saw Warren's blatant absence as a chilling symbol of political indifference, a callous disregard for human suffering. In his quiet Senate office, John Kennedy sat, the weight of the unfolding moment pressing upon him like a thick, oppressive fog. He didn't relish the spotlight, despite his knack for sharp, unforgettable one-liners. The true battle, he knew, was far from over. The documents on his desk, carefully handed to him by his trusted aide, Emma, were more than mere papers. They contained a Reuters report, cold and clinical, detailing precisely how $500 million in relief funds desperately meant for Louisiana's shattered infrastructure, for its people's survival had been flagrantly diverted to a bridge project in Massachusetts, and chillingly, this project was tied directly to a major Warren donor. Kennedy's fingers traced the report's edge, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as he reread the figures. $500 million, meant for repairing shattered levees, for restoring potable water systems, for protecting fragile homes, now funneled to a project in a state untouched by floods. A state whose political elite clearly prioritized patronage over genuine need. Kennedy understood the immense, explosive consequences of going public with this. It wasn't just about exposing Warren. It threatened to expose a pervasive system that brazenly prioritized political favors and donor interests over human lives, over the very real agony of its citizens. But Kennedy knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he could not stay silent. Not now. Not after facing his constituents. Their eyes hollow with grief, their hands calloused from the grueling, endless work of rebuilding lives from the mud. He thought again of Sarah, the mother in Monroe, her voice breaking as she spoke of her son, lost to the floodwaters. "He tried to save our dog," she'd whispered, her hands trembling, "and no one came to help." Kennedy had knelt beside her, promising answers, promising action. That promise, etched deep within his chest, now burned with an unyielding intensity. The next Senate session felt like a powder keg waiting to ignite. As Kennedy took his seat, the air buzzed with a tense unease. Senators whispered, their eyes darting between him and Warren, who sat rigidly at her desk, her face a mask attempting to conceal mounting fury. The official agenda was dry budget reviews and procedural votes. But Kennedy had other plans. When called to speak, he stood, holding the Reuters report aloft, a physical manifestation of the damning truth. His voice was low, yet weighty, resonating with the quiet authority of a man who had simply had enough. "I'm not here to attack for sport," he began, his words cutting through the tension like a razor. "But I want to know why $500 million, meant for people, for clean water, for safe homes, was used to build a bridge in a state that didn't see a single drop of flood water from Hurricane Hecate." The room fell silent, as if the entire world held its breath. Warren's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing, her carefully constructed composure threatening to crack. "This isn't political gamesmanship," Kennedy continued, his voice rising, holding the report aloft for all to see. "This is about Sarah, who buried her son because a levee broke. This is about families drinking bottled water because their systems failed, because the funds meant to fix them were diverted. This is about lives, Senator, not just line items." His words rang out, not just an accusation, but a profound, unyielding call for accountability. The chamber froze, Senator's eyes wavering between shock and a dawning, uncomfortable unease. Kennedy set the report down, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering briefly on Warren before moving on. The impact was immediate. Senators shifted uncomfortably, some flipping through papers, others staring blankly at their desks, desperately avoiding eye contact. The truth, in Kennedy's steady hand, had just landed with the force of a hammer blow. Elizabeth Warren shot to her feet, her voice sharp, yet undeniably unsteady, a stark contrast to the commanding force it had been just moments before. "Senator Kennedy," she declared, gripping the podium, her knuckles once again white, "these accusations are reckless and baseless. I've spent my career fighting for the vulnerable, and to suggest otherwise is cheap political theater." But her words lacked conviction, hollowed out by the raw truth Kennedy had exposed. The room felt it. A few of her dwindling allies offered a scattering of applause, feeble and desperate, quickly drowned by a rising tide of murmurs, whispers of doubt that rippled through the chamber. Reporters in the gallery typed furiously, headlines already taking shape in their minds. "Kennedy exposes misdirected relief funds. Warren's defense crumbles." Outside the marble walls of the Capitol, the story of Kennedy's unwavering stand and Warren's exposed duplicity spread like wildfire. In Louisiana, in the battered community centers and makeshift churches, residents gathered, their faces etched with the lingering pain of loss. Watching the Senate session live streamed on old, flickering TVs, Sarah, the mother who had lost her son to the merciless floodwaters, sat on a folding chair in a Shreveport church, her eyes glued to the screen. When Kennedy, with quiet reverence, had spoken her name, connecting her profound grief to the cold, hard numbers of the diverted funds. She covered her mouth, tears streaming down her weathered face. He remembered, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion to the person beside her. He's fighting for us. Her raw, authentic reaction, captured by a local journalist, immediately went viral, garnering thousands of shares, amplifying the emotional resonance of Kennedy's words. "This is real leadership," one commenter wrote. Their sentiment echoed across countless posts. Kennedy doesn't just talk. He names the truth. The public's reaction wasn't confined to Louisiana. Nationwide, people shared their own stories of being abandoned, of communities forgotten after storms, of towns left to fend for themselves after wildfires. Kennedy's words tapped into a deep, pervasive frustration, a simmering sense that the system, the very government sworn to protect them, favored the powerful, the connected, the politically expedient. On social media, someone posted a photo of a flooded street in their neighborhood, the murky water still visible, captioned simply, "This is my home." Where was Warren? "Thank you, Kennedy, for asking what we're screaming." The post was shared thousands of times, each share amplifying the collective, desperate call for accountability. In Washington, Warren's team scrambled to contain the uncontainable damage. Senior aides huddled in a closed office, their voices low but urgent. "We need to get ahead of this," one said, frantically flipping through a tablet. "The press is digging into the bridge project. They have names, dates, donor lists." Warren herself sat silently, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a rare tremor of vulnerability in her usually ironclad composure. She knew about the Massachusetts Bridge Project. She knew it was overseen by a longtime donor who had specifically invited her to that Boston conference during the floods. At the time, she hadn't thought much of the fund diversion. It was routine, a favor for an ally, a simple quid pro quo in the complex dance of D.C. politics. But now, under the unrelenting glare of Kennedy's accusations, under the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny, it felt like betrayal. She drafted a statement denying direct involvement, a careful tapestry of words designed to deflect, to obscure. But the evidence was mounting, relentless and irrefutable. Records clearly showed her office had approved the fund transfer. A leaked email, published by a fearless journalist, suggested she knew of the donor connection, of the direct link between her political allies and the suffering in Louisiana. The pressure was relentless, and even once loyal allies began, cautiously at first, to distance themselves. "Elizabeth, you need to face this head-on." Senator Rachel, a longtime friend, confronted Warren after the session, her voice low, with worried concern. "The records don't lie. They won't let this go." Warren nodded, but her face was blank, a mask of internal turmoil. The fiery resolve that usually defined her seemed dimmed, almost extinguished. The Senate was no longer a safe, predictable space. It had become a brutal battlefield, and John Kennedy, with the quiet force of truth, had unequivocally turned the tide. The turning point came unexpectedly during a late session discussing unrelated legislation. Rachel, her voice trembling but firm, rose. The room hushed, all eyes on her, sensing the gravity of her intent. "I've worked with Senator Warren for years," Rachel began, her words careful, each one chosen deliberately, "but today's evidence raises questions we can't ignore. I propose an immediate investigation into the allocation of relief funds tied to Senator Warren's office." The motion hit like a thunderbolt in clear skies, electrifying the chamber. Senators froze, their eyes darting to Warren, who sat motionless, her hands gripping the desk's edge, her face a stark tableau of dawning horror. The vote proceeded, swiftly and unsparingly. Hands rose across the aisle, Democrats and Republicans alike, their faces grim, solemn. The motion passed with a resounding 2/3 majority, a rare, seismic moment of bipartisan agreement, a clear message of rejection. Warren's face paled further, her eyes dropping to the floor, as if the harsh reality of her situation was physically crushing her. Her illustrious career, her carefully constructed image, teetered precariously on the brink of absolute ruin. As the nation watched, captivated and enraged, the response to the Senate's decision to investigate Elizabeth Warren's office was fierce, a groundswell of public demand for justice. In Shreveport, the community center, a beacon of resilience, held a prayer vigil for Hurricane Hecate victims, where residents gathered to share their unvarnished stories of loss and survival. Sarah, the mother who had tragically lost her son, stood before the crowd, her voice steady now, imbued with a quiet power despite her deep, enduring pain. Senator Kennedy didn't just call out Warren, she declared, holding up a faded photo of her beloved boy, his smile forever young. He gave my boy a voice. He gave us all a voice. The crowd erupted in applause, cheers mingling with tears, a raw, heartfelt expression of gratitude. A local pastor, tears glistening in his own eyes, handed Sarah a letter she had written to Kennedy after their first meeting. Read it to him, the pastor urged, his voice thick with emotion. Let him know how much it matters. The letter, simple, yet profoundly heartfelt, thanked Kennedy for remembering her son, for fighting for families like hers who felt abandoned. It ended with a poignant plea, don't stop. We're counting on you. In Washington, Kennedy received the letter late that night, delivered by his trusted aide, Emma, her eyes red from the day's emotional intensity. He read slowly, each word a direct imprint on his heart. Sarah's story wasn't just a tragedy. It represented countless others, forgotten, their pain buried under layers of bureaucracy and cynical political games. Kennedy folded the letter carefully, placing it in a drawer beside an old, weathered photo of his childhood home in Louisiana, a house once swallowed by the very floods he now fought against. He didn't fight for headlines or applause. He didn't fight for himself. He fought for Sarah, for her son, for everyone who had been told their pain didn't matter. As the night wore on, the media storm didn't relent. It intensified. Newsrooms scrambled to keep up with reports growing ever more detailed as new damning evidence surfaced. A leaked email from Warren's office, published by an intrepid journalist, confirmed beyond doubt that her staff knew about. The fund diversion, the donor tied to the Massachusetts Bridge project, it turned out, was not merely an acquaintance but a close associate of Warren, a detail that sent shockwaves through the political establishment and the media alike. Talk shows debated the scandal with unprecedented fervor, commentators calling it a stark wake-up call for Washington, but for Kennedy, the fight wasn't over. He knew the system was far bigger than one senator, far more entrenched than one scandal. The truth he'd exposed was just the beginning. Looking out his office window at the Capitol dome, glowing under the vast, indifferent night sky, Kennedy felt the immense weight of what lay ahead. The Reuters report on his desk still held more secrets, more truths waiting to be revealed. And John Kennedy, with the quiet, unyielding resolve of a man who had seen too much to ever back down, was ready to keep speaking out. Kennedy's words didn't just silence a room. They awakened a nation. His single sentence, carrying the raw, undeniable power of truth, not only left Elizabeth Warren reeling, but sparked a movement that spread far beyond the Senate's marble walls. People were captivated, not by political drama, but by the sheer honesty of a man speaking for the voiceless. TV screens glowed with images of Kennedy's steady gaze, his warm, low voice echoing in living rooms from Louisiana to Idaho. Talk shows dissected the moment, hosts pausing their usual quips to play the full clip, the profound silence after. Warren's stunned expression, speaking louder than any commentary. The nation wasn't just witnessing a scandal. They were experiencing a reckoning, a profound moment when the forgotten finally demanded to be heard. Kennedy, however, didn't bask in the spotlight. As newsrooms clamored for interviews and pundits hailed him as a new hero, he quietly stepped away from Washington's glare, boarding a plane to Louisiana. He didn't announce the trip, didn't invite the press. Instead, he went silently to Monroe, where Hurricane Hecate's scars still marred unrepaired streets. In a community center lit by flickering fluorescent lights, Kennedy sat on a folding chair among residents who'd lost homes, livelihoods, and loved ones. He listened as Tom, a grizzled fisherman, described his boat, his sole source of income, swept away by the flood. He nodded as Eda, a grandmother, recounted bathing her grandchildren with bottled water because the pipes still ran with mud. This wasn't campaign material. These were the stories Kennedy carried in his heart, each one a heavy stone reminding him why he spoke out. "I'm not here to make promises I can't keep," he told the crowd, his voice soft but firm. "I'm here to make sure your voices aren't drowned out again." The room erupted in applause, not the polite, measured kind of Washington, but the raw, unburdened gratitude of people abandoned for too long. In the Capitol, Elizabeth Warren grappled with the crushing fallout. The vote to investigate her office's handling of relief funds sent shockwaves through her inner circle. Once loyal allies grew scarce, with empty seats at strategy meetings and unanswered calls. In her dimly lit office, Warren sat alone, staring at a draft statement on her laptop. The words were carefully chosen, stopping short of admitting direct fault, but acknowledging missteps in her office's decisions. I believed I was serving a greater good, she wrote, the words almost hollow, but I now see my actions caused pain to those I meant to help. The statement was brief, almost a whimper, and when she read it to a small group of reporters outside the Capitol, her voice lacked its usual fire. The cameras captured a woman who seemed diminished, not entirely defeated, but undeniably lessened. As if the immense weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. Headlines were merciless. Warren steps down from key committees amid scandal. Kennedy's truth forces Warren to face reality. But the final line of Warren's statement caught many off guard. I disagree with Senator Kennedy's approach, but I respect his dedication to his people. It was a rare, raw moment of humility, prompting even her most ardent critics to pause and reflect. The impact of Kennedy's actions went beyond one senator's downfall. In Louisiana, community organizers sprang into action, directly inspired by his courageous stand. A group called Hecate's Voice, founded by flood survivors, launched a powerful campaign demanding accountability for relief funds. Residents were shirts printed with Kennedy's now iconic words. When people were crying for help in the floodwaters, where were you? At marches, their message clear: no more excuses, no more forgotten towns. Schools in Louisiana incorporated the Senate confrontation into civics lessons, with teachers using the clip to spark crucial discussions about integrity and public accountability. In a Shreveport classroom, a shy 10-year-old student named Lily, whose family had lost their home to Hurricane Hecate, raised her hand. Senator Kennedy made me feel like I matter, she said, her voice trembling but firm. After class, she spent hours with colored pencils, meticulously sketching Kennedy standing before a crowd, holding a simple sign that read, "He spoke for us." Her teacher sent the drawing to Kennedy's office. When he received it, Kennedy paused, his throat tightening. As he read the attached note, "My mum says you're the first person who cared enough to fight." He hung the drawing prominently on his office wall, a quiet, powerful reminder of what truly was at stake. The movement wasn't confined to Louisiana. Nationwide, Kennedy's actions became a resounding call to action. In Michigan, a factory worker posted a video holding a bottle of dirty water, asking, "If Kennedy's fighting for Louisiana, who's fighting for us?" In Oregon, wildfire victims echoed the sentiment, demanding transparency and accountability in relief spending. Pastors in small churches played Kennedy's speech during services, calling it a lesson in standing up for what's right. Even late-night shows, typically mocking politics with cynical glee, showed a rare moment of respect, with one host saying simply, "This is what it looks like to remember who you work for." The wave wasn't partisan. It was rooted in a shared, profound hunger for leadership that saw people, not just power. Kennedy felt the immense weight of this responsibility. One late evening, after returning from Monroe, he sat in his Washington office, the city quiet beyond the window. Hundreds of letters piled up, sent from across the country. A Nebraska farmer wrote of crops lost to floods, thanking Kennedy for giving him hope. A Florida nurse described her hospital running out of supplies during a storm, praising Kennedy for speaking truth to power. Each letter was a thread in a vast tapestry of pain and resilience, and Kennedy read them all, his eyes stinging. One letter from Clara, a retired teacher in Shreveport, stood out. "My husband spent his life building our home," she wrote in a shaky hand. "The flood took it, but when you spoke, Senator, I felt I wasn't forgotten." Kennedy folded the letter carefully, placing it beside Lily's drawing. He didn't seek fame or victory. He sought justice, and he knew the fight was far from over. When Kennedy returned to the Senate, the atmosphere had palpably shifted. The chamber held a new, grudging respect, not just for him, but for what he now represented. Senators who once saw him as a quirky Southerner now nodded as he passed. Even those who profoundly disagreed with his politics couldn't deny his immense impact. In a quiet moment before a vote, Senator James Rawley, a longtime moderate, approached Kennedy. "John," he said, his voice low, "I've been here 20 years. Never seen anyone change the narrative like you. You didn't just call out Warren. You called out all of us." Kennedy nodded, offering a faint, weary smile. "Not for me, James," he said, "for them." He didn't need to say who them was. It was the American people, the ones left behind, The legacy of Kennedy's words grew stronger each day. News outlets began investigating other misallocated relief funds, uncovering a chilling pattern of misconduct from Shreveport to Buxie. Residents shared stories on social media, going viral. Reuters journalists dug deeper, publishing more damning documents on diverted funds, not just in Massachusetts but elsewhere. The Hecate's Voice movement organized powerful marches, demanding transparency, with T-shirts bearing Kennedy's quote, becoming a potent symbol of resilience. In his office, Kennedy looked at Lily's drawing, knowing he'd ignited something bigger than politics, a fundamental call for justice for the invisible. Grassroots campaigns sprang up nationwide, demanding audits of relief spending. In Washington, a bipartisan group of senators proposed a new oversight committee to ensure aid actually reached those in need, a move Kennedy quietly supported. But for him, the real work was always back home. A Tia Town Hall in Monroe. Kennedy stood in a packed gymnasium, no podium, no script, just a man and his people. After the event, a young girl approached him, clutching a folded piece of paper. It was Lily, the girl who drew the picture. "I wanted to give this to you myself," she said, handing him a new drawing. Kennedy, among families, their hands raised. In gratitude, Kennedy knelt, his voice catching. "Lily, this means more than you know," he said. "You keep drawing and I'll keep fighting." As he stood, the crowd roared, not for a politician, but for a man who had reminded them their voices mattered. In Washington, Warren's office grew quieter still. Her hollow statement failed to quell the storm, and as the investigation deepened, more undeniable evidence emerged: meetings with the donor, emails about fund diversions, a chilling trail of decisions painting a stark picture of neglect. She avoided Senate appearances, her once commanding presence replaced by a shadow of profound regret. One evening, alone in her empty office, she watched a news report of Kennedy's Monroe Town Hall. She saw Lily hand him the drawing, saw the distinct tear in his eye. For a moment, Warren's own eyes welled, not for her lost influence or her fractured career, but for the devastating realization of how far she'd strayed from those she'd sworn to serve. Kennedy's words didn't just expose her, they were a mirror, unflinching, reflecting her choices, and the image staring back was harsh, unforgiving. Nationwide, the story of that single sentence became a rallying point. It wasn't just about a senator or a scandal. It was about a broken system that had forgotten its fundamental purpose. Kennedy's office received thousands of messages, handwritten letters, more children's drawings, even a heartfelt quilt from a Shreveport sewing group, each square stitched with a story of loss and hope. A veteran in Alabama wrote, "I never trusted politicians, but you, Senator, are our guy." A single mother in Texas sent a photo of her kids holding a handmade sign, "Thank you, Kennedy, for fighting for the little guy." These weren't just notes. They were mandates, powerful reminders that the fight for truth, for accountability, was bigger than any one person. One night, Kennedy stood by his office window, gazing at the Capitol dome gleaming in the distance. In one hand, he held Lily's drawing, in the other, Clara's letter. Their faith was a heavy burden, but it was also an inextinguishable fire, urging him on. He hadn't meant to start a movement, but he'd lit a torch, and America, raw and yearning for change, was ready to blaze. The sentence that brought Warren down wasn't just a moment, it was a promise. A promise John Kennedy was determined to keep for Lily, for Clara, and for every voice that had been silenced for too long. The story of John Kennedy and Elizabeth Warren, centered on Hurricane Hecate and the diversion of $500 million in relief funds, vividly reflects the critical issues in American society today: the deep-seated distrust in the political system and the urgent, undeniable need for accountability. The burgeoning Hecate's Voice movement, Lily's heartfelt drawing, and Clara's poignant letter powerfully showcase the transformative power of community voices and personal connections, much like today's grassroots movements on social media demanding transparency in public spending. Kennedy's actions, from boldly exposing misconduct to quietly listening to the pain of people in Monroe, underscore a timeless truth: true leadership stems from prioritizing people over power. Conversely, Warren's profound regret, as she faced the devastating consequences of favoring a donor, starkly highlights the treacherous pitfalls of straying from fundamental responsibility to vote as a common, tragic issue when politicians get caught in Washington's intricate web of interests. The Ultimate lesson is clear: every individual, whether citizen or leader, must actively speak out and relentlessly act for justice. Like Sarah, Tom, and EDA, sharing their pain to drive monumental change, Americans today possess unprecedented platforms to amplify their stories, relentlessly demanding accountability from officials. Take profound inspiration from Kennedy, who meticulously read every letter and kept Lily's drawing as a sacred motivation, truly listening and acting for the community, thereby building an unbreakable trust. At the same time, steadfastly avoid Warren's perilous path, where opaque decisions and political fervors led to a catastrophic loss of public faith. In life, always stand up for what's right, whether the act is as small as writing a heartfelt letter or as monumental as organizing a nationwide march. Because, as John Kennedy so powerfully proved, one honest, unwavering voice can indeed awaken an entire nation. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked a flicker of hope or a surge of conviction, please like this video. Share it with anyone who needs to hear this message of truth and accountability. We want to hear your thoughts and experiences. Comment below with your own stories of forgotten communities or moments where a single voice made a difference. And most importantly, subscribe to join us in amplifying the voices of people like Sarah and Lily, demanding justice and relentless accountability from those in power. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next video as we continue to shine a light on the unwavering story of truth and its enduring power.